Making smoothies is easy for most good blenders. But once you start making peanut butter, almond butter, hummus, pesto, or thick homemade sauces, things get a little more demanding. Thick mixtures don't always move easily around the blades, and weaker blenders can struggle or require you to stop constantly and scrape everything down. So today we're looking at 5 blenders that are worth considering if thick, homemade recipes are what you really want your blender to handle. And if you enjoy practical kitchen product guides like this, take a moment to subscribe. Starting our list is the Braun Tri-Force Power Blender. This is an interesting choice if you want a powerful countertop blender that can handle more than everyday smoothies and drinks. For thick recipes, one of its biggest advantages is the combination of strong blending performance and multiple automatic programs. Instead of having to guess which setting to use every time, you can choose a program and let the blender work through the ingredients. That can be convenient when you're making things like hummus, pesto, dips, or thicker sauces. The large pitcher is also useful when you're preparing enough food for several people. If you're making a large batch of hummus for a gathering or preparing several servings of a homemade sauce, you won't be working with a tiny container. And this blender isn't limited to spreads. You can use it for smoothies, frozen drinks, soups, sauces, and other everyday recipes, making it a more versatile appliance for the kitchen. There is, however, a trade-off with that versatility. The Braun is a fairly substantial countertop appliance, so it isn't the best choice if you're working with very limited counter or cabinet space. The larger container can also be less convenient when you're only making a very small amount of dip. So I'd look at the Braun as a good option for someone who wants a capable, versatile blender and regularly prepares larger batches. If you're looking for something more accessible in price, the Ninja Professional Plus blender with Auto IQ is one to consider. This blender is built around a large pitcher and a powerful motor, which makes it useful when you're working with tougher ingredients. Nuts, seeds, chickpeas, frozen ingredients, and other dense foods can all put more demands on a blender than a simple fruit smoothie. The Auto IQ programs are another useful feature. They give you preset blending patterns, so you don't necessarily have to stand over the machine and manually adjust the speed throughout the process. That's particularly convenient when you're preparing several things in the kitchen at once. For dips and sauces, the large capacity can be an advantage if you're preparing enough for a family or making food ahead of time. It also means you can use the blender for your everyday smoothies and drinks, rather than buying something specifically for spreads. But there's an important limitation here. Large pitchers aren't always ideal for small amounts of very thick food. If you're making just a little hummus or a small batch of nut butter, the ingredients can sometimes spread out rather than staying close to the blades. You may need to pause and scrape the sides or add ingredients strategically. So while this is a capable and relatively affordable choice, I wouldn't pick it specifically for tiny batches of nut butter. It's better suited to someone who wants a powerful everyday blender that can also handle thicker recipes. At number 3, we have the Ninja Footy Power Blender and Processor System, and this one takes a different approach. Instead of being just a traditional blender, it's designed to cover several food preparation jobs. That makes it especially interesting if your goal is to get more functionality from one appliance. When you're making dips and spreads, that extra versatility can be useful. You might use it to blend a smooth hummus one day, prepare a sauce the next, and then switch over to another food preparation task without needing a separate appliance. The system also gives you different containers and processing options, which can be helpful when you're dealing with recipes that have different textures. For someone who enjoys experimenting in the kitchen, that's a significant advantage. Another reason I like this one for our list is that it sits between a basic blender and a much more expensive premium blender. You're getting a lot of functionality without necessarily having to buy several separate machines. But there's a downside, and it's mostly about space. This is a system, not just a blender. That means more containers, accessories, and parts to store. If you have a small kitchen with limited cabinet space, you need to think about where everything will live when you're not using it. There's also more to clean compared with a basic blender. So this is best for someone who actually wants the additional food processing capabilities. If you're only interested in making smoothies and occasional dips, you may not use enough of those extras to justify the larger setup. Now we're getting into the premium options, starting with the Vitamix Explorian. The reason Vitamix keeps appearing in conversations about thick blends is that this is not simply about having a powerful motor. The overall design and the amount of control you get make a difference when you're working with dense mixtures. The Explorian gives you manual speed control, which is particularly useful for recipes that change texture as they blend. Think about making almond butter. At first, you have relatively dry pieces moving around the container. As the nuts break down, they become a thick paste. Eventually, that paste becomes smoother and begins to move differently around the blades. Being able to control the speed gives you more flexibility as that transformation happens. The included tamper is another major advantage for thick recipes. Instead of stopping the blender repeatedly to push ingredients down with a spatula, you can use the tamper to help guide stubborn ingredients toward the blades while the blender is running. That can make a noticeable difference with nut butters and very thick dips. The Explorian is also versatile enough for everyday cooking. You can use it for smoothies, sauces, dressings, frozen desserts, and other recipes, so you're not buying a machine that only comes out when you're craving peanut butter. The downside is fairly straightforward. This is a premium blender, and the price reflects that. If you only make thick spreads once every few months, it may be difficult to justify spending this much. It's also a relatively tall appliance, so if you keep your blender underneath a low cabinet, you'll want to think about the available clearance. But if you're serious about homemade spreads and want a machine that can also become an everyday kitchen workhorse, the Explorian is a very strong option. And taking our #1 spot is the Vitamix 5200. This is the blender I'd be looking at if thick recipes aren't an occasional experiment for you, but something you genuinely want to make regularly. The 5200 has a reputation for handling demanding blending jobs, and that matters when you're working with foods that don't naturally want to move around a blender jar. Nut butter is a perfect example. Once you start blending nuts, the mixture can become thick enough that a regular blender may struggle to keep everything circulating. That's where the 5200's manual speed control and tamper become particularly useful. You can adjust the speed as the texture changes and use the tamper to help keep the ingredients moving toward the blades. That gives you considerably more control than simply pressing a preset button and hoping for the best. It's also useful for homemade hummus. Chickpeas and tahini can create a dense mixture, especially if you prefer a very smooth texture. The same applies to pesto, thick sauces, homemade dressings, and other spreads where you're working with relatively little liquid. And there's another reason the 5200 makes sense as the #1 choice: versatility. You're not buying it only for nut butter. You can use it for smoothies, soups, sauces, frozen desserts, dressings, purees, and countless other recipes. So if you cook frequently, there's a good chance this blender can replace several smaller appliances, or at least become one of the most frequently used appliances on your counter. Of course, there are two things to keep in mind. First, the price is significantly higher than the budget-oriented blenders on this list. It's an investment, and not everyone needs that level of performance. Second, the design is fairly tall. If your kitchen has limited storage space, especially underneath upper cabinets, the 5200 may not be the easiest blender to leave permanently on the counter. But if your priority is making thick, demanding recipes, and you want a blender that's capable of handling them repeatedly, the 5200 is difficult to overlook. So, which blender makes the most sense for you? If you want a versatile blender with a large capacity and automatic programs, the Braun Triforce Power Blender is an interesting alternative. If you're looking for strong everyday performance without moving into premium blender pricing, the Ninja Professional Plus is worth considering. The Ninja Footy Power Blender and Processor System makes more sense if you want one appliance that can handle blending and additional food preparation jobs. For someone who wants premium performance without going all the way to the top of the price range, the Vitamix Explorian is a compelling choice. And if homemade nut butter, hummus, pesto, and thick spreads are going to be regular parts of your cooking, the Vitamix 5200 is the one I'd look at first. Just remember that a blender's ability to handle thick mixtures isn't determined by motor power alone. The container design, blade system, speed control, and how easily you can keep dense ingredients moving all play a role. I've included links to all 5 blenders in the description, so you can check their current prices and availability for yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.